Hello, this is Curt Pringle. Thank you for tuning in to the Talking Issues series. This is episode number 20, and I'm really excited about the discussion today because it's a longtime friend of mine, but someone who knows his profession and his craft so well. Actually, I call him a retail craftsman, someone who understands retail, the future of retail, and really knows what's necessary to make a successful retail community district venture. And you'll hear a little bit more about that. But let me introduce Shaheen Sadeghi.
Thanks very much. Thanks for having me.
Glad you're here. You know, we got to know each other during my time as mayor when Anaheim had this massive packing building that the redevelopment agency had purchased so it wouldn't be torn down. And they tried so many things to put in that building, and they always hit a dead end. And we reached out to you in about 2009, and that's a long story, and we'll wait and talk about it later. But maybe we can start out by talking about you. And I know you come from the fashion design background. You were with some notable brands in sportswear, Quicksilver, Gotcha, others. But why don't you give us a quick overview of how you got into the current space you're in?
Okay. Grew up in Michigan, and my parents were at Michigan State, and they were getting their PhDs. So I sort of ended up growing up in East Lansing, Michigan. I ended up
Smart family. Wow, that's scary.
Well, they were they liked education.
Yes.
And I ended up going to Pratt Institute in New York for design. I wanted to get out of Michigan. And it was literally the top school, design school, architectural as well, and engineering back in the days. But it was in Brooklyn, New York. Brooklyn was not very fashionable back then, but it was a great program. And so when I completed design, I sort of fell into the fashion design aspect and worked in Manhattan for some prevalent brands like Charles James. And I then moved to California and got into action sports, short stints with Catalina Sportswear, which was a big brand back then for swimwear. And I wanted to get into more of the men's action sports. So I started working for a company called Janssen Sportswear, which was acquired by VF. VF currently owns Vans, Supreme, lots of other popular brands. They're really a dynamic company. My office was in downtown LA in the Eastern Building. As a matter of fact, my office ended up being Johnny Depp's apartment. He got converted into
I think I saw that on the news.
Yeah. So
in a trial discussion recently.
Yeah, so that was really interesting to watch. But the headquarters for Janssen was in Portland, Oregon, so it was back and forth. And my main office was in Hong Kong, Tsim Sha Tsui area, where we manufactured, and we basically started the import business.
And that's in the 70s, 80s? Or
This would be in the late 70s. I moved to California in 79, so 79 forward.
Wow.
And later on, I decided to take a risk and join a couple of really young, dynamic fellows that moved here from South Africa, Michael Thompson and Joel Cooper. Michael unfortunately passed. Joel is still a dear friend of mine. And had a great stint with Gotcha Sportswear. So we went from 0 to 150 million. It seems like in very few short years. Great company. And then I moved to Quicksilver as a president.
And both those are Orange County?
They're both in Orange County. I wanted to run another public company because VF was public. And then my next stop was starting my own business.
You know, I don't think a lot of people know, a lot of the brands and surfwear, sportswear and stuff really do have Orange County connections. And, you know, you might look at Vans tennis shoes or a lot of the other small little brands that I've known over the years, but a lot of those brands really did come from Orange County and surf sports culture from here.
Absolutely. So I mean, we used to call it Velcro. alley.
Yeah.
So it's basically, what's happened with tech up in the Bay Area.
Right.
I mean, so the entire surf industry really started here, right
So
here. in
like
Southern
which ones? I mean, you had Pacific Sunwear here and
Well, Pacific
Rip
Number.
Curl and
Well, some of these brands actually are overseas, like including Quicksilver, but then they
I see.
migrated here
I
in
see.
Southern California.
I see.
Yeah, so as started here, and Quicksilver and Gotcha,
I think one of
OP, and
I think one of the first manufacturing, if not the first, was in Anaheim for bands.
could have been.
But I'm not going to
Yeah,
go there. I'm
could
just
have
going to
been.
lay it out there without
Yeah,
any judgment or fact
yeah.
checking
I think it
afterwards.
was in Santa Fe, but yeah, I lost track of that. But yeah,
Yeah.
it could have been.
Yeah. Well, that's good. So you set up the Little American Business Holding Company,
That's correct.
Lab
Yeah.
Holdings, right?
So
That's what you called it.
in 1993, um, just I saw a cultural shift that was happening. Obviously I was doing retail around the world. We set up offices in south of France in Biarritz with Quicksilver, and had offices in Paris for Gotcha, and then we did international business with all the brands that I was involved with, including Janssen. We had a big distribution in Japan and so forth. So it was a global situation.
You said a cultural shift. So you see 30 years ago, there was a cultural shift, which was a shift to what?
Well, I recognize that this next generation was not shopping at the malls.
Mm-hmm.
My generation did. Again, I grew up in Michigan, and in the 70s.
You did that to get out of the snow, though.
Yeah.
Get
No,
a warm
absolutely.
spot to walk
Yes,
around.
yeah. In the wintertime, it was a nice heated box.
Yeah.
And in the summertime, it gets very humid. It was a nice air conditioned box.
Right.
And eventually restaurants moved in, and then that's where you took your girlfriend or your date or you hang out with your buddies. The mall was replaced to downtowns.
Right.
And I think that's happened across the country.
Right.
And so punch through to the 90s, I don't think your average cool young person would take a date to a mall.
Right.
And so we recognize that early. I think the other aspect, in not just the cultural dichotomy that was going on, was that this next generation was not a mall shopper. And so we recognize that there are places like Orange County, for instance, where you at the mall, you had a strip center.
Yeah.
And coming from the action sports industry, the sweet spot for me was that we would start these brands in Orange County, and they would become these multi-million dollars. I mean, Quicksilver's case, I think, got up to about $2 billion, and international brands. And the sweet spot for me was always, these little companies that grew bigger, and where would they go? And I was running a public company looking for quarter growth. And each time I opened a new distribution in Ohio, it was less cool with the kids on the beach. So I think, we used to say, size is the enemy of cool.
Yeah.
So it was a real challenge, to have this quarter public company growth and then be able to keep the cool of the brand.
And therefore you built the anti-mall. Was that your first retail physical location in Costa Mesa, with one of the highest grossing, if not the all-time highest grossing malls in America, South Coast Plaza in Costa Mesa? So is the anti-mall, was it anti-South Coast Plaza, or was it just convenient to be there?
Well, I think there was a combination of things. I mean, quite honestly, I was doing business with Broadway. Remember them?
Yes, I do.
Great company, but they went out of business. I was doing business with Buffums.
Yeah.
They went out of business.
Right.
Bullocks. They went out of business. Magnum, they went out of business. As a matter of fact,
JCPenney's, Mervyn's.
Well, I didn't really do Penny's deal because we were higher brands, But most of the California people that I just mentioned went out of business. Even the May company got bought out by Robinson, so there was consolidation. Now, this is all happening in the early 90s.
Right.
And so I think that's where I saw, even Macy's, quite honestly, I think if you look it up, Macy's filed Chapter 11, this Macy's West, when the Finkelstein family, wonderful family, by the way, used to run it. So I think I felt there was something going on. And so what I wanted to do is build a platform for young brands, Orange County brands, local brands, to have a place to showcase their products. And
I didn't
because they
know
were
that
going to,
about you.
yeah,
I
they're,
like that perspective,
yeah.
right? I mean, how do you only sell your wares through this traditional channel, which is going away in these big box department stores?
Well, I think at Quicksilver, we opened our own retail. I remember the first one we opened in Hawaii. I mean, it was hell on bandwagon because the current retailers got so bent out of shape, but it was the future.
Yeah.
And so I looked at models like Ralph Lauren because he opened that beautiful store on Madison Avenue, and I know he got into a lot of beef with Macy's and Bloomingdale's, who had big Ralph Lauren shops. But I think everybody's business elevated, because he had a opportunity to tell his story of his brand. So I think when we decided to open retail, which is one of my projects at Quicksilver, it was we need to tell our own story because I can no longer rely on the department store to tell my story. And so when this lab anti-mall, lab stands for Little American Business.
Right.
The idea was I want to have a platform for these other companies that were right behind me. Massimo was kind of a hot brand back then. Stussy was a brand. Like, all these folks are going to have the same problem. They're not going to sell to malls or to department stores. Let's set a platform so they can showcase their products. That's really what it was.
It's very funny because back at that time, I had a buddy from church, and he was a part of like 2 or 3 different surfwear, sportswear companies. One was Swivel and a couple other. And to me, this is an interesting story because it's seeing this little teeny microcosm of a friendship I had to see that replicated over. That was happening all over Southern California at the time. And through you now, how do you sell these products? How do you get out with new names and new places? And so describe that early anti-mall, because most everyone in Orange County who is good has gone to the anti-mall. So we want to make sure we reference that because it's still there with a good Cuban restaurant.
Well, truth to be told, and I've said this story before, so hopefully I'm not being redundant, but I was reading an article in the Wall Street Journal, and I read that Mall of America was pulling all the benches out of the mall because they referred to them as teeny bopper,
Right.
hot dog on a stick shopper, bubblegum chewing teenagers to hang out because they didn't look at them as customers that are going to actually spend money.
Huh.
And when I read that article, I just realized, holy Maloney, we just sold a couple $1 billion of product globally to, as an industry here, right here in Orange County, and to that customer. Right. And I knew that customer was into clean oceans. They were into politics. They were into technology. They were into government. It was like, this was a very sophisticated. So we had such different lenses. Yeah. And so my lens compared that current youth-based, call it, or new customer with the way I grew up in the 70s. These folks were a lot smarter than we were. And so I saw an opportunity I really felt a disconnect. And so I wanted to create a place where they would actually hang out.
Yeah.
Because I think for me, it was really less about selling them goods, but creating an environment that speaks to them, the village, the tribe. And hey, if they stop and get a cup of coffee and go buy something, that's great.
Yeah, but see, that's what's cool about your story, because that is the discussion of the evolution of retail, right? I mean, there are more restaurants in retail malls than there ever have been before. There's more hangout opportunities in those malls than there ever was before. And maybe it's that full cycle coming back to the main streets of small towns used to be hangout locations where you had retail and connectivity and maybe some restaurants, but kids would hang out there. And now maybe that is what you're pointing to at the anti-mall or the camp in Costa Mesa or the packing house, the packing district in Anaheim. Those are hangout locations that are not just focused on buying stuff, but on the whole experience of hanging out, eating, watching a show, and doing that type of thing.
Well, I think with all of those projects, and including our future projects, quite honestly, it comes down to creating an environment for the small operators because we look at them as artisans,
Right.
they don't necessarily fit into the current mass culture experience. And I'll bore you with a very quick philosophy here. So after World War II, Japan was destroyed. Most of Europe was destroyed. Russia was destroyed. So I think for the rest of the world to purchase your goods and services, we were the only act in town. So you bought American. And I think through this, we built our middle class, which I'm sure you're a great you've had great study in this, Curt. But, we have, I believe even today, we have the greatest middle class in the history of mankind. And so how we did this is through mass manufacturing and through mass culture. Again, I grew up in Michigan. I worked at some of these automobile places. Those were great jobs to be had. And so we paid a price for this, and we became very mechanical. Everything was mass oriented, and even the way we consumed, again, if we went from Michigan to Ohio to watch a Michigan-Ohio game, and by the way, football is like a religion back in that part of the country.
Right.
We got into my dad's station wagon Comet, and where do we eat? McDonald's. Where do we stay? Holiday Inn. Now, if we went to Colorado on a family vacation, where do we eat? McDonald's. We either stayed at the Howard Johnson or we stayed at the Holiday Inn or someplace.
Right.
And the entire country consumed that way because people wanted things that was predictable, and we were happy with just kind of mediocrity, to be honest. And if you punch over now to 2014 or just the 2000s, if I travel to Austin, Texas, I'm not going to go eat at McDonald's or the Cheesecake Factory. I want to try some badass barbecue from Austin.
Right.
If I go to Portland, I'm not going to order a Budweiser. I'm going to order crafted beer and have a conversation with the brewmaster. And I think this is not just a California thing, just as a country, we're understanding the value of localization. Farmers markets are back, everywhere. And so this I see as a tremendous opportunity in how it's taken us 300 years to get here culturally, but I see as the greatest opportunity and the greatest shift that we're starting to celebrate by region. And we're also starting to celebrate like the old days, local products, local grocer, local restaurants. So this mass chain homogenization is shifted. And just to kind of wrap up on this theory is that as mass culture basically breaks down, it didn't really dissipate. It's broken down into these series of subcultures. And so within each region, there is all of these subcultures. And because of the internet, these subcultures have become big business. Yeah. That's really what's going on.
And what I see though in you, because I do believe I know what happens at the lab and what you did there in Costa Mesa or the camp across the street and how cool and unique that is from your sister property across the street, or the packing house, or downtown Anaheim, which were all projects of yours, to projects you're working on had established in Corona or Garden Grove or Long Beach. And I think what's interesting is none of them would be viewed as the same developer with the same interests and the same product there. And I think what I see so fascinating in you, and maybe it is from your fashion design history, is you have curated retail in certain areas to properly put the different pieces together to touch that community in which you're reaching out to. And I find that fascinating. So I know that you shop and try to find the right type of business to plug in. And I also know that when you can't find it, you oftentimes create it yourself.
Well, yes, that's true. That's very true. But I think, Curt, the basic essence of what we do is we believe that every location, depending on the topography and depending on the architecture of the building, if it's an adaptive reuse, or is it a ground up, and then the local culture.
Hmm.
It has to be different. So this idea, we're not just the anti-mob, but we're anti-homogenization. So I think to just cookie cutter these things is doesn't make sense for us. And I think, you know, if I even pull the emotions out of that and look at it from a practical finance standpoint, you know, the how long it takes in California to get entitled. Even my latest project took me almost 6 years.
Right.
And so from the time that you start, 6 years later, you get entitled with a concept, and then it'll take you 2 to 3 years more to build it. So now we're investing for
Then maybe
something.
another 5 years to make any money off it. So
Exactly. So you're looking at a runway that's basically 8 years, 9 years. So we're making decisions that we think are going to be right the way people shop and think and entertain and family values and all those things 9 years from today.
yeah.
And so it takes a lot of archaeology for us to be able to get the comfort to do that. And that's why we're very selective in what we do. And that's why, quite honestly, a lot of our successful projects recently has been partnerships with the city. And I think, you know, I have to go back and sincerely give you credit for trusting our vision and also having the vision of not selling it to a condominium developer, you know.
Right.
But
Right.
it's very
I like condominium developers, but
well,
what he's referencing is this building they were planning on or considering putting condominiums
that's
at the
correct.
inside of the packing house. So
Thank you for clarifying.
yes,
That. I have nothing.
I don't want these condominium people to hate me for that.
No, I don't. I thank you for correcting that. Yeah, my point is, you know, we have in talking about the packing district now. You know, we have a horrible habit in this country of basically destroying our past.
Yeah.
And the Anaheim decision was driven by the building.
Yeah.
That's we looked at the building and we thought, you know, this is an honest American building. It's not Rome or Florence, but it's American, and it's one of the very few wooden structures still left in California. So what are we going to put in there? And I thought the idea of residential wouldn't be fair to the community, but the idea of doing something that brings the community together, everybody gets to enjoy it. And I think it's been one of the greatest pleasures for us, and including my team, of course, because we still have 10 years later people coming today and say, oh, my grandma used to work here. And I'm like, you know, and there's like, you can't buy that.
So let's say nobody who's watching this knows what you're talking about in the packing district, the packing house of Anaheim. So paint the picture of what it was and what it is today.
It's a 1919 building that was the original Sunkist packing factory. It's wood structure, and these were somewhat typical in the state of California. As I mentioned, most of them actually burnt down through fires, which is kind of a shame. This one survived, but magically it survived. You would know this better, but I think 8 or 9 mayors. Because, you know, as the world evolves, there's always an idea, and every mayor is looking to improve their town, but somehow this thing survived. So, I mean, I guess everybody gets credit for that.
Yeah.
But so the idea for us was to reinvent, you know, sort of, you know, revitalize this building and really respect the architecture. And at the time when we did our long-term thinking about what's coming next, we identified food to be the new canvas. And we tried to do this project in San Clemente. We spent 6 years in San Clemente. We got the project approved, and then there was a referendum, unfortunately, and basically killed the project.
So you still own the casino building.
Yes.
And therefore, this was going to be a component off of that.
Yes, this was going to be the parking lot.
Right.
So after 6 years of exhaustion, which was very unfortunate.
No, I thank my friends in San Clemente for pushing you our way. So.
Yeah, well, we ended up taking that footprint basically, and we sort of reprogrammed it into the packing house.
Right.
And the reason we were convinced that this would be the right project for Anaheim, and quite honestly, I only learned this when I got invited to Anaheim. I had no idea Anaheim was so diversified. all of a sudden there's a wonderful Indian community here. There's a wonderful Arabic community here. There's a wonderful Hispanic community here. There's the Asian community here. And the best way to bring all of these communities together, I mean, this is truly an international city. And of course, not to mention, Disney and the convention center and the Angels and the Odyssey. Like, there's so much here. What's the best way to bring people together? I don't think it was shopping.
Right.
It's food.
Yeah.
Food is a connector. It's the language that everybody, and I think with a lot of these cultures, which is really a wonderful thing, they still dine together. In America, we only get together at Thanksgiving, which is like the most ridiculous thing.
Right.
But these folks, Hispanic communities, grandkids come and grandparents come, and there's 12, 15 people show up and they get food from different places and sit in the backyard. Same thing with a lot of the Asian families and Middle Eastern families. So I think the dynamics of how this thing works has really been fascinating for us.
No, that's awesome. And how many shops, businesses, restaurants in the packing house are national chains?
None.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think we have all gotten to a point of seeing national chains dominate. There's reasons, and for a lot of good reasons, you have national chains that are able to bring product out. But what you're talking about is kind of a whole different dynamic of localizing, not even regionalizing, but localizing, and again, curating a product where people can come and see unique, specialty, kind of focused restaurants or shops or manufacturers or vendors.
Well, that's a very interesting question because, I think the general thought process for us is that in today's environment,
right,
everybody is a brand.
Right.
Facebook, social media, Instagram.
Well, or Etsy, you're individually selling different products and different things. Yeah, exactly.
I think the other thing that I'm convinced about is everybody's cool. So the old days we used to say,
feel really good.
Oh, you're definitely cool. I just wouldn't tell anybody. But what I mean by cool is everybody gets it. Everybody gets it. And I think this customer is so different than the way we used to be. As I mentioned again, as mass culture broke down, it is these subcultures. So not that everybody's cool, everybody also belongs to some kind of a subculture. They might not wake up in the morning thinking I'm a part of a subculture, but they are. Mm-hmm. Example, environmentalist. Mm-hmm. It started as a mini subculture. It's a global subculture now. Because through the internet and there's communication. Now, the person that's an environmental, the chances are they probably really support, organic foods. Well, look what's happened to the organic market. It's huge.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. And many of those people might even be vegan because they don't want to hurt animals. So I think that's a subculture. I have my own vegan restaurant, by the way, because I believe in that subculture. And so this concept just kind of rolls out, So I think this mass culture for masses and everybody wants the exact same thing, it goes back to, the first Ford model was all black. You got black or you got black.
Right.
And today you can kind of see that just doesn't work. How many models they have to put out, how many colorways they have to put out. So it's very important for us. This is where I talk about, personalization, localization, and customization as opposed to homogenization. I think the other thing that's happened is if we look at everybody's a brand, our community is a brand. And what's happened in the past, particularly for the city leaders, except you, of course, they just allowed anybody in. And what I've always said, I've said this for 30 years, if you let another national chain come in and basically take over your cities, they're robbing your brand. And the city, to me, have a responsibility of not just creating culture, but preserving the culture of each city. Yeah. And I think in order to preserve, you have to be more selective And I also think they have to really promote locals.
Yeah.
Because if there's somebody, like, what's better than, going back to your point, if somebody's visiting here in Anaheim, I want to see what's going on local. I mean, they can go to Applebee's in Ohio,
Right. Can you say what you're doing in San Marcos? Because I think that takes a little shift from what people may see at the packing house, or for that matter, at the camp in Costa Mesa. That takes a shift to really start empowering those local crafts people, the local manufacturers.
San Marcos for us is really the extension of our philosophy,
Right.
little American businesses.
Right.
And so our little American businesses went from apparel centric to food centric, and packing district. And, we've done lots of foods.
Right.
And so for San Marcos, which is a wonderful city, by the way, I think talk about good city leadership. I can't say enough good things about them. But San Marcos has a young culture. There's a university there, and it has all of the national homogenized, they got all your national fooderies and, the Home Depots and the Costcos and all of those things, which is okay. What it's missing is something to celebrate the locals and the local culture. So our project is focused on next generation of retail. And the way we see next generation of retail is, I believe in this 32 years ago when I started my business, and I believe in the exact same philosophy today, that most creativity, entrepreneurship, innovation, risk comes from small companies. And whether it's Silicon Valley or somebody showing up and coming up with an electric car, it's never been the Fortune 500 folks. And again, not talking about Anna, but what has Bank of America invented? What has AT&T invented? What has IBM invented? These are, I don't understand, so it's all comes from small innovators. So we want to build a platform for these small innovators. And so I call it micro manufacturers. I think micro manufacturing is the next wave of retail in America. And technically what it does, it eliminates the middleman, because this traditional, and I was in that industry for many years, you build your product here and then you ship it to a warehouse, and then you take it to a trade show, and then you get the orders, and then you ship it to the department store, and then the department store puts it on their warehouse, and then, advertises it and sells it to the consumer. And then whatever that doesn't sell, they ship back to you. I mean, it's lousy.
Yeah, but someone makes money all the way along.
Well,
The
so many
person who
people touch
doesn't
it.
really make the money is the manufacturer.
Well, I mean, the manufacturer can make money too, but how do you make money? You keep making cheaper product, but it's a lot of price pressure, but
right.
it really becomes about pure consumption. And, and by the way, last I knew, we're 4.5% of the world population. We still consume 25% of goods, services on the planet. So we still like to consume as a country.
Right.
But my point is, we're consuming better, which is exciting. We should encourage that.
Right.
And we're buying things that are more meaningful. And so my point being is that the next generation is somebody making a product, and they don't need to be in a high fashion mall and pay high rents. And then they want to have a relationship directly with the consumer, because they want to control their brand or their culture. The consumer, on the other hand, it has much more value when you buy it from the maker.
Yeah.
And where those two meet is what I call intrinsic value that's created through the social context. So whatever we do has to have a social aspect to it. And I've mentioned to you before, if I don't necessarily go into a grocery store, like I did in the 70s in my 12-pack and take it to my basement and watch
12-pack of beer, you're saying.
12-pack of beer and watch football with my buddies.
Exactly.
I go to a brewery and I want to have a conversation with the brewmaster, and and so
Right.
tell me about your beer philosophy, and this is the new customer. Before I consume, I want to know about the beer, and then I also say, before I consume, I want you to teach me how to make beer.
Yeah.
So this customer wants to know how to make beer, and then they'll buy your beer. So it's such a different mindset, you know.
No, I really love that idea on micro manufacturing. So I've got to look for that in the next, what, 2 or 3 years to open up in San Marcos. But also, I mean, I remember when you had an idea and it may not have completely panned out, but you were even thinking about the same thing with chefs and building a live work opportunity for chefs to live on their property and then make and use this kitchen to
Yes.
make unique new
Yeah.
things. And I know that's part of your head and it has been for a while, and that's so exciting to see and kind of see where the next step, because I do think you're a a retail craftsman and someone who knows how to connect with the customer and people. And I really appreciate what you've done and appreciate you coming here today. So thank you
Thank you
very
very much
much.
for great to see
Nice
you
to be with
again.
you.
Thank you very much.
All right.